The Treasure Map by Pieter E Haumann. Chapter 1. The Longest Road. "How about we play a game?" said Mother, sensing an imminent outburst of boredom coming from Annie's corner of the back seat. They had been cooped up in the car all morning, and there was still a solid hour's drive left before they reached their vacation home by the coast. "What shall we play?" exclaimed Annie, only too happy that she wasn't the only one in need of some entertainment. "How about car cricket?" Father suggested. Car cricket was a favourite of his, and even Robert, who was never too keen on spot the object games, had to admit that he found it rather entertaining. "What's that?" asked Annie, who failed to see how anyone could play cricket for fun, much less with cars. "It's simple," said Robert. "We choose a type of car which is assigned a certain action from a cricket game. Whenever one of those types of car passes us by, that action happens." "Exactly," said Mother. "A minibus, for example, would be a wicket, while a bucky could be 4 runs. "So you sum up all the runs and then compare it afterwards?" Annie inquired. "That sounds like a lot of maths," she added, dreading the task of having to do any school-related activity during the holidays. "It's exactly like mathematics," said Robert, rubbing his hands together at the prospect of doing something more cerebral during his confinement. "Let's kick this off, shall we?" said Father, noticing a freight truck coming up ahead and cunningly scoring himself a 6 before the others had time to react, taking a comfortable lead. "And that's another century!" exclaimed Annie victoriously. She jumped across the back seat of Father's sedan and performed a best victory dance right up against Robert's face. "I think that makes Annie the winner," said Mother, as she tallied up the scores in a notebook. "It's a stupid game," said Robert sulkily as he folded his arms and stared out the window, avoiding his sister's antics. He was heading for a half-century when a motorcycle gang approached from ahead of them. It was, of course, he, himself, who had assigned a leg before wicket to motorcycles, and within a few seconds his entire innings had come to an end. "Don't be sulky, brother," said Annie, beaming proudly. "And besides," said Mother, "it looks like we were just around the corner." The game had done its trick, and as Father steered the car over the next hill, he switched off the air conditioner, and immediately the smell of fresh sea air filled the car. "There it is!" Annie exclaimed, as she pointed towards the vast ocean lying ahead of them. "And with time to spare as well," said Father, who had taken the opportunity, when Mother was distracted, to set the speed control on his motor a little higher than he was allowed. "Indeed," Mother replied, before giving her father a rather stern look. "I can't wait to get into the ocean," said Annie, as she fondly remembered the last time they were there, and she chased Robert around the beach with a small octopus she had discovered beneath a few rocks. "Now," said Mother, "there will be no shenanigans this time around, and we shall not embarrass each other in front of our guests." The guests, of course, being the Bellies and the Darvells, who were set to drive down from Devil's Leap the next morning. "Of course," said Annie, ensuring that her fingers were crossed as she replied. "All right," said Father. "Let's get some provisions before we head towards the house." It was another hour, at least, before they finally turned onto the driveway. There was a collective sigh of relief as Father brought the car to a halt right by the front door. "I'm in the front room," shouted Annie as she stormed into the house. "I don't think you'll have that room to yourself," said Robert. Since there would be 3 times the number of people normally staying at the house, Robert was indeed correct. There were 4 bedrooms, one for each of the pairs of parents, and then one where the girls could sleep. The boys, however, had to make do with the couches in the lounge, as well as a fold-up camping cot Father once bought when he played with the idea of being more outdoorsy, which lasted only a single hiking trip in the Magaliesberg. "Well," said Annie, "I'll be sleeping there tonight." "I don't really care," said Robert, disappointed in himself for not calling dibs on that room ahead of time. The reason that said room was held in such high regard was that it was the only one with a sliding door leading directly to the beach, and Annie wasted no time in running towards the sliding door and whipping it open. "Would you look at that?" said Robert, as the fresh sea breeze lapped at his cheeks. "When can we go?" asked Annie, rearing to get her toes into the soft sand and taking on a few waves to show off her buddy surfing skills. "Well," said Mother, "it's high tide right now, so I don't think we should go swimming just yet. Also, your father seems a bit tired after the drive and might want to take a nap." "Can we then go and play on the rocks?" Annie pleaded. "I'll keep an eye on her," said Robert, himself hoping to stretch his legs after their trip. Furthermore, he was itching to get back to the beach to replace a few shells which had broken after Annie received a new ball the previous month and had her very own blitzkrieg on all things breakable around the house. "Very well then," said Mother, "but don't be too long. We still have to unpack everything and get dinner started." "Look at this!" exclaimed Annie, as she pulled a rather slimy-looking piece of seaweed from between 2 rocks. "What do you think it tastes like?" Don't put that in your mouth, Robert ordered. I wasn't going to, said Annie slyly, as she approached her brother from the rear with the seaweed firmly grasped in her hands. There are no intact shells, moaned Robert, oblivious as to what torture was approaching him from behind. It looks like there were a few massive swells recently, he added, and turned around to see the remnants of a large series of waves against the embankment leading up towards the house, and evidence of a dramatic increase in the layers of sand across the beach. Annie dove forward, trying to smack her brother against the head with the seaweed, but it slipped from between her fingers and flopped to the ground, covering it in sand. That's a shame, whispered Annie, as her brother continued his search. What if we climb up that outcrop over there? She asked, pointing towards a large collection of rocks extending high above the beach. I don't remember it being that high, said Robert, as his eyes traced the towering rock face. In fact, an unseasonal tropical storm had ravaged the coast only a few months earlier, and this had caused severe erosion of the beachfront. This, in turn, had laid bare a landscape which had previously been buried by a few meters of sand and ground-up shells. Come on, shouted Annie, already halfway towards the side of the cliff. I'll chase you to the top. Just be careful, said Robert. Those rocks look pretty sharp, and we don't want to get into any sort of trouble on our first day here. Annie agreed, but soon the excitement of reaching the top of the outcrop overshadowed any of her brother's calls for prudence. In any case, he was just as excited as she was, and soon followed her, clambering and pulling himself up against the slippery rocks until he too had reached the top of the outcrop. There we go, cheered Annie, as she slapped her brother on the back with congratulatory glee. Robert collapsed onto the rocky surface and lifted his feet into the air. He held his eyes shut, too scared to look at the state of his feet. Annie, he panted. Am I bleeding? She gripped one of his feet tightly and proceeded to examine the series of small cuts in the soft skin of his heel. Just a few scratches, she said, before dropping his foot and trotting off to explore the flat top of the outcrop. It seems like an entirely different place now, said Robert, as he rolled over and placed his feet into a shallow puddle of water to ease the prickling. Look at this, exclaimed Annie, as she dropped down next to a small hole in the surface. She stuck her head into the hole and with an extended arm waved Robert over. Just be careful, said Robert, as he struggled to his feet. I can see the water moving down there, said Annie, her voice echoing in the chasm below. It's moving back, she added. Annie, said Robert, I think you'd better retreat. He had barely issued his warning before a large swell came rushing onto the beach, and a sudden surge of water came rushing through the hole and shot up into the air. Are you okay? Robert exclaimed, as Annie appeared from amidst the water, flat on her back with her eyes the size of saucers. What was that? She finally mumbled, as she tried to catch her breath. I think there's a cave down there, said Robert, helping his sister to her feet. Whenever a large wave comes storming in, it forces the water up in the cave and it shoots out of this hole. Do you think we can get down there? Asked Annie, as she wiped the drenched-through golden locks out of her eyes. Maybe when it's low tide, said Robert, but we'll have to wait until tomorrow for that. He dropped down beside the hole and, careful not to suffer the same fate as his poor sister, peered inside the chasm below. It was darker than he had imagined it would be, save for a thin streak of sunlight cutting into the darkness below the water's surface. The exploration was cut short by Mother calling them home for dinner, and thankfully for Robert's feet, they managed to find an alternate route down the back of the outcrop, saving the poor boy from suffering any further injury.